Today we will be talking about the Cold War that happened after World War II. The Cold War had threats of nuclear war but didn't really heat up to an actual war between the US and the USSR. We will focus on aspects of the event that occurred that contributed to the tension of the Cold War. We will expand on the space race, Red Scare, Espionage Act, and President John F. Kennedy.
The space race began in the late 1950s with the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Unions. During this time period, space made up for another dramatic arena for competition between the Soviet Union and the United States. This race increased the previously existed tension between these two major countries. During the space race, both countries made major advances in aerospace technology. The Soviets were the first country to put a man-made aircraft into space, which was called the Sputnik, and they were the first country to put a man-made aircraft onto the moon, which was called the Luna 2. But the Americans were the first country to put a man into space. His name was Alan Shepard, and they were the first country to put a man onto the moon, which was called the Apollo 11, and the man was called Neil Armstrong. Um, by landing a man onto the moon, U.S. basically won this space race. Throughout the race, Americans were captivated by the advances these two nations had throughout the race, and that was basically due to the media coverage they had during the time.
So, from the late 1940s to the early 1950s, the perceived threat posed by the communists sparked hysteria throughout the US. Such hysteria affected the entire nation, especially federal employees and celebrities. In March 21st, 1947, President Truman decided to issue the Loyalty Order, which basically required all federal employees to be analyzed to determine whether they were loyal or not. One simply had to accuse a person of being a communist, and thorough investigations into whether or not he or she would be held. Some was even placed in jail just from accusations. One way to think about it is that it's sort of like the Salem witch trials, but without the burning at stake, and the murder, and the witches. A key player throughout the Red Scare would be Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, who's probably the biggest communist hater ever. Using intimidation to establish himself as a powerful and feared figure, he took anyone who opposed him down by charging them with disloyalty to America. But he didn't last. Eventually, his own peers realized how much of a tyrant he was, which ended his influence in the Red Scare. This guy was so bad, they named a term for accusing someone as communist after him, which was McCarthyism. This hysteria only grew as international events such as Communist leader Mao taking over China, the quote-unquote defeat in Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Soviet Union successfully testing their nuclear bomb. These communist advances caused people to believe that the US was at risk.
Espionage is the act of obtaining information on a rival without the knowledge or consent of the other. The Soviet Union and the US have been spending millions of dollars during the Cold War to train and outfit spies. This was because the punishment for caught spies were often jail or even death. Now, the most famous incident by the USSR was the incident of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were caught by the US passing on nuclear secrets to the Soviet Unions. They were tried, found guilty, and sent to their deaths by electric chair. And the most famous incident by the US was the U-2 plane incident, which was a spy plane by the US flying over Russian grounds that had been shot down. And the spy was caught, and this led to the first spy exchange by the both countries, which was after the the U-2 plane incident. And both of these countries had their own departments in dealing with espionage and countering this act. The Americans had the CIA and the Russians had their KGB. These two departments use different techniques to root out and catch these hidden spies within their country.
Kennedy. Born on May 29, 1917, in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, he led a privileged life. His brother, unfortunately, was killed in action, and he took it upon himself to fulfill the duty that was meant for him, to become the first Catholic president. As one of the most loved presidents, he was a man of many feats and accomplishments, such as setting the goal of putting a man on the moon, supporting Cuba's anti-Castro movements, and reducing Cold War tension by limiting nuclear testings. His support for the anti-Castro movement led to his response to the Russian missiles found. There were several options for that situation, one being launching an airstrike on the missile bases, another being a full-scale invasion on the base, another being a naval blockade of the island. But good guy Kennedy decided to blockade in order to avoid military action. Eventually, both the blockades and the missiles were removed and all was peaceful. He strongly believed that diplomatic and military actions in foreign countries would only increase the tension on the Cold War, so he avoided them at all cost. But on November 22, 1963, while riding a motorcade, President Kennedy was assassinated. Many theories emerged regarding Kennedy's assassination. Whether it was mafia conspiracies or the U.S. military complex, speculation and debate still exists today. Did the Cold War help America to spread peace and freedom throughout the world? 1. Containment. 2. Disarmament. 3. Liberty. The losses in both Vietnam War and Korean War marked the failure of America's attempt in containing communism from spreading. Before disarmament, the U.S. was successful in reducing the nuclear power of several nations with the agreement of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. While the fall of the Iron Curtain in the USSR technically gave the restricted countries the freedom, it also endangered the peace between those countries. So the Cold War did not help America spread peace and liberty throughout the whole world.